first of all, I like to thank Dr. Viduranga Vaisundar. She told how we met. And then after that, we were together in Brazil last year, when we went to the International Union of Food Science and Technology Conference. And she also visited New Zealand to attend the New Zealand Institute of Food Science and Technology just this July last and stayed with us. So this is like visiting her in her own territory now. So thank you, Vidu, for that. And yeah, inviting me here back to Kandy brings back a lot of memories. Probably you recognize this place. This is Sangamita Hall. And that's where I started my studies in 1965 as a resident here. Then second year we had to go out, and I found a boarding house very close to the agriculture faculty. Never went back to the residential hall. Yeah. So this was my classmates during that time. I don't know whether you can recognize me, but I'm sure you will recognize some of the people here. I don't know, Nimal Ranavira. Yeah. And Y. De Silva, Yasanta De Silva, and I don't know, this is me. You may not believe me, but it's me. Yeah, so most of these people are in different parts of the world now. My roommate used to be this one, Georgita Tisera, and she married this one, and now they are in Australia. So there's a lot of campus romance too. So it's very nice to go back, and so I even kept the newspaper where it was announced, who entered from which school. That was in 1965. Now, we used to have Ceylon University Agricultural Association those days, and this was the 1967, the committee, and I'm sure you remember him, Professor Dr. Baptist, yeah, and some of the others, some of them are no longer with us, but I'm still here, with a different look. I was wondering whether to wear a sari, but I checked with Ranga and said it's very casual, so I'm happy to be like this. So I like to sort of share. So after leaving Sri Lanka in 1970, I used this to show them where I was born in Sri Lanka. I did a master's degree in food technology under FAO International Food Technology Training Center in Mysore. Some of you may have heard about the Mysore Food Science and Technology Center. And from there, after the MSc, and that's where I met my future husband. We were the two who were selected by Ceylon government at that time to do this course. And from there we went to the United States, and where I did a PhD in food and nutrition. So I started with agriculture, master's in food technology, and a PhD in food and nutrition. Kind of, went laterally rather than going in depth into an agricultural field. And from there, we got married while we were in the United States. We got our first appointments were at a university in Brazil. They invited us to set up a new department of food science and technology at a university. And it was very interesting. Last year, while visiting Brazil or attending that conference, I was able to go back after 30 years to the university where we started that program and see our students being like directors and deans of the faculty, and they had their own students, so I felt like they were like my grand students. And from there, we have a son who was born in Brazil, and when he was growing up, we thought, we need to find a place where the language, English-speaking country, and we ended up in New Zealand. The language in Brazil is Portuguese, so I became fluent in Portuguese to be able to lecture in Portuguese. So I probably can do a lecture in Portuguese better than in Sinhalese. So from there, we were there from 1980, and we had the opportunity to go to Singapore in year 2000, and that's when we connected with Vidu, and we came back And it's a long story how I came back first, and then Conrad followed. And then, you know, in New Zealand I was working. I'll show you some of the things that I've done. And then had the opportunity to go to Tanzania on the volunteer service abroad, New Zealand, the government volunteer, because it's like giving foreign aid. You can give money or you can give food or anything like that, as well as technical know-how. So it was like capacity building in Africa was my role, to help people start small businesses based on food dehydration, jams, pickles, and various things. It wasn't very high-tech food technology, but simple things, which were sometimes you might even think, you know, it's like common sense things, but very valuable for them who didn't know. One of the projects that I did in Africa was to teach them how to cook banana blossom, kehel mua. They were throwing it or feeding it to animals, so not only kehel mua, kehel leli, the kahap kolapata, green peel, and the middle pith of the banana stem. All these three, you know, was at village level. Then I also trained the trainers in food processing, solar drying and all that. And then when I went there, they didn't have an association to involve the professionals in food science, although they had a food science department. So I was instrumental in setting up what is called the Tanzania Institute of Food Science and Technology there. Last year in Brazil, I was able to connect that national organization to the International Union of Food Science and Technology. Vidhu was witness there. So then Africa, I came back to New Zealand, and still I'm doing kind of voluntary work, and a lot of people, you know, ask me to do projects, and I do, or I pass it on to some of my colleagues who are young, who are coming up as consultants. And right now I'm here also doing kind of a voluntary work, but for the family. I have a sick relative, so I came here to look after her family. Yeah. So, you know, this is something that I put forward to you. If our life, you know, our whole life is like a day. It's like, see, if we consider our first 30 years as the morning time of the day, after that afternoon, evening, it's the morning time that we study and we prepare for a career, right? Most of you are either there or here. Huh? Then you come to a stage where it's the retirement. You know, it's like retired but not tired. You know, you can still work, whatever work, you know, voluntary or professional. In New Zealand, there's no retirement age, so we can go on and on, you know, until we die, or they don't want you or you don't want them, you know. So my husband is still working, but I'm kind of like doing all sorts of things. Including, you know, this opportunity came through because of that. And I'll share with you, you know, my career, so that I think each one of you have got a book to write. Yeah? So this is my basis of, as I said, you know, I started with agriculture honors in '69, Ceylon at that time, was a lecturer in agricultural chemistry, masters in food tech, newly married in the US. Started a PhD at Oregon State, you know, and completed in '77. Brazil as a professor and head of the department. They elect their head of the department, and I was surprised that they elected me. Even, you know, while I was not very fluent in written Portuguese, had a very good secretary, so it was an interesting experience. Boy was born, and juggling career and being a mother, you know, in a completely a new country, which was not easy. Then we immigrated in '81, and a school kid in New Zealand at that time. Then I worked for a company called Watties, which is now part of Heinz. Watties tomato sauce, you know, baked in that company. And I also did an MBA at that time. You know, I thought, you know, I had all this technical background, and I was working for a commercial organization, and it was helpful to have that good balance. So part-time MBA, executive MBA through Massey University. Some of you may have heard Massey University. My husband was with NUS, then I worked for a company called Fraser and Neave, FNN, And at that time our son was working, so we could leave him behind and for us to go to Singapore. And there I had the opportunity to do an evening class in counseling psychology. I've always wanted to study psychology just for the interest's sake. And there I did a diploma, and it was very interesting. And went back to New Zealand and had the opportunity to spend 2 years in Tanzania. And there another new language, Swahili, but I didn't learn it as well as I did Portuguese in Brazil. But it was a very interesting experience. Then back to New Zealand, and right now I'm here. So this is like my life story on a chart. You know, I'm sure if you think of your life story, there'll be equally interesting things to share. So, you know, as I said, I have a BSc, MSc, PhD, diploma in counseling psychology, MBA, but I consider my highest qualification motherhood. And during that time, I also was able to write 3 books. Co-author, one was called Nutrition 2000, because when I went to New Zealand, some nutrition group invited me to be the editor of the New Zealand Nutrition Foundation. So I volunteered to do that and collected all the information that I put into the newsletters, and thought one day I will collect this into a book. And this is what came out of that, very basic, you know, for average consumer. And it was published by a publisher called Longman Paul. And then during that time, you know, in 2000, when I went to Singapore, the company that I worked for, they used to ask me to give public lectures in shopping malls and other places on basic nutrition, and also to promote their food, which was mainly dairy and other juices and various things like that. So I used the information from this book, but at that time it was out of print. So a Singapore publisher asked me, why don't you write another one? So I started writing, but I didn't want to do the same basic thing. I was going to call it phytochemicals or something, but the publisher said, no, we have to give an interesting name, and they called it Hot Potatoes and Cool Bananas, but it's a nutrition book. And there was a celebrity chef there in Singapore who provided a few recipes, so it's not a very technical book, but it gives the goodness of the phytochemicals, what it's good for and what diseases things will prevent. Have a look at them if you want. So the last one is about my life. You know, my own father died when I was 6 months old. I had a stepfather, and for most of my life, and just before he died, I was in New Zealand. I had a dream. In my dream, I said, thank you for being my father. I couldn't make it to come and tell it in person. He passed away. I came for his funeral, went back to New Zealand just to get over my grief. I started writing. What got written was my life story. And there's a lot of Peradenian stuff in here with a lot of pictures as well. I left a copy with Vidhu, and Vidhu's mother said, you know, she's been reading it with a lot of interest because probably she knows the places that I mentioned in the book. So that was, you know, which I did just before I went to Africa. I launched that book in 2010. And I have, so these will kind of lead into what I will leave behind for the next generation, which is in line with my motto. I have a personal motto, which is, I aspire to inspire before I expire. I think even going to Africa was a little bit of that. And even, you know, now coming and being with these grand nieces and nephews of my, you know, sister-in-law's grandchildren, they are finding a lot of joy in being around me because I do various little projects with them, and they are quite keen on that. So then I'll take you to the farm and you know, from farm to fork, the roles of food technology. Farm. And this is what we are used to, isn't it? I have done this. I've gone behind 2 bullocks and plowed the land for agriculture. I have done this. You probably may have seen agriculture graduates getting on to tractors and preparing the land, and a lot of leaches sometimes, you know, when you do the previous one, or transplanting. So this is all not new to me, so very hands-on degree we had in agriculture. And, harvesting and preparing lands of different sorts, then harvesting and threshing like this, and nowadays you probably have a little bit of mechanized things. And even in other countries, they started farming like this to feed their families, small plots, and later, became like this. When agriculture goes into this capacity, this, volumes, then there need to be, some way of storing and processing this product, otherwise they will be wasted. Then we feed the nations like that, not just families, right? And, we can have storage like this, or with large volumes you have to have controlled storage to avoid any pests and mold and other things happening. So then we have the need to have factories to process this food, to keep long, to increase the shelf life. And that's where the food technology part comes. So I'm happy that I did agriculture because I understand which varieties could be used for processing in a better way than other varieties. So factory, nowadays, factories are all very clean, stainless steel, and all these HACCP kind of safety measures are applied. And then different kinds of even flexible cans. Nowadays you have, retort pouches which are processed like this. But in countries like Africa, where there is no electricity sometimes, you have to resort to appropriate technology. And this is a solar dryer that we designed to do the training that I did with the training of trainers there. So as you see, probably, it's a very basic thing, corrugated iron board with black paint and covered with a perspex and hot air to go. And as you see, we blanch the vegetables and dry them on mesh trays, protected from dust and birds and animals, and through hot air passing through the product and escaping from the top there. So these were the students in Africa that we were teaching. And then we end up having a whole lot of food products which we just can't send it to the marketplace like this. Then comes the importance of packaging. So they say, don't send your new product to the world naked, So the packaging, labeling, they become important issues for food technologies. Then nowadays you go to a supermarket and you get a whole lot of choice, and we need to educate people how to select their food, reading the labels. That becomes part of the importance of food technology, not only to put what's on the label, but even to interpret, to teach the consumer how to interpret that. And consumers look for various things in their food. They look at the sensory attributes, the smell and the textures and looks and the taste. And also convenience, how convenient, with a lot of women now working and a lot of parents working, they like the convenience of just to open up a package instead of starting to cook from I was told that there are no nambili nowadays. When I was in Africa, I asked my sister-in-law, can you bring a nambili? And she said, you can't find nambili now. So that's how we have advanced here, isn't it? I don't know, I was told that. And then of course, nutrition, very important. So, I try to put this together, from, if we look at roles of food technology on the pathway from farm to fork, it's not in any particular order, industry, research, now research is what you are doing here mainly, but it has to be applicable to industry, to make, at the end of the day, to make some money or to create wealth for the country, isn't it? And academic, health industry is becoming very important, not for treating, but for prevention. And ingredients, packaging, logistics, how to get food from here to there, If it is frozen food, it has to be frozen storage, frozen transport, and that all becomes part of logistics. Shelf life, labeling. Production is an important thing. Marketing, and how do you market, providing the technical information. Distribution, quality, nutrition information, labeling, food analysis, food safety, regulatory things, because you can't go and add anything into the food. It has to be within a certain specified levels, which are controlled, governed by food regulations. So these become part of a, big package now, not like growing in your backyard and eating. If you can do that, that's the best still. I am not promoting food technology here. If you can grow your own food and eat, nothing to beat that, So I always, when I do the marketing work for companies, I say fresh is best. If you can't have fresh, then go for frozen or something like that. So these are the things that we have to be mindful that as a country that started with no food technology. Don't let food technology ruin our health. That's exactly what I was trying to tell the Africans too. They have a healthy food range, and a lot of chemicals and other processing, over processing can really destroy our food. Our menu, the food we eat. So then from there, so I took potato as an example to tell about from farm to fork. Anyway, so this is like seed potato being planted. I'm sure you probably must be familiar with this, and young potato plants, and you get the harvesting of the potatoes, and some varieties of potatoes. There are lots of varieties of potatoes. Not all are suitable for making French fries. So I'm just taking French fry. Not that I'm promoting French fries. If you can avoid it. But I'm using that as an example. Okay. So don't go and tell that I told you eat French fries. No. Although I have worked with French fries a lot, supplying to McDonald's, because I worked for the company that was doing, and I have gone to select equipment for this company and done from farm to fork of French fries, and also McDonald's hash brown and all those things. We've done a lot of this for New Zealand with my hands. So this is New Zealand, and the company that I work for, what is, they have a whole lot of different potato products. And so when you take a potato, there are, the potato itself, the solids content is higher just below the skin, so you get a concentration of high solids there, and in the middle, kind of low solids in most of the varieties, not all, but most. And when you make a French fry, you end up getting a French fry like this. In McDonald's or in French fry quality assurance terminology, it's called a soggy. Yeah. And so that's not acceptable. You have seen French fries, McDonald's, have to stand straight like that. So there are ways of, determining how do you do that. By specific gravity method, just, in the lab scale, you can do that. Once you get to know the variety, then you don't really go and do this all the time. But if you have a variety that you want to test, this is one of the tests that they do, specific gravity test. So specific gravity increase and the dry matter or solids content also increase. So high solids are better than low solid varieties for French fries. Okay. Then McDonald's had this patented variety at that time called Russet Burbank. This was a very high solid. Solids distribution was very good, and this was only for McDonald's. So even if they release this seed potato to other countries, they said, now make sure you don't supply this to other. At that time competitors were KFC, Pizza Hut and all that. In New Zealand, the company that I worked for, that Watties, supplied all three companies, but we had to monitor, whom we supplied what, because it's not common in other countries for these three to buy from one company, three fast food companies to buy their potatoes from one company, because New Zealand is such a small country with only 4 million people. So they couldn't have 2-3 potato factories. There was only one state-of-the-art potato factory, and that happened to be this particular place where I worked. And so,
No.
I'm doing something wrong. So, as you see the, yeah, so this particular variety, remember the name Russell Burbank, I don't know if it's available here. It will be a good variety if you can, or even to find out what is equivalent variety that grows here, which is high solids, you know. For, I don't even know who supplies French fries to McDonald's here. I'm very curious to know, are they importing it or is somebody here supplying? If you find out, let me know. So, and another thing that is important is also the color of the French fries. So, color of the potato fries are affected by the storage. And proper environment for potato storage, temperature and humidity are very, very important. Refrigeration of potatoes can convert some of their potato starch to sugar. So we know that, you know, Maillard reaction gives a browning, and so if it is not controlled or monitored, you can end up getting French fries like this, which are not desirable at all. And you get these sugar amino acid compounds, you know, through Maillard reaction. And sometimes it also goes into, you can see this, into a thing called acrylamide. Acrylamide is considered a carcinogen, you know, so that's why I said, you know, don't get hooked on to French fries. Acrylamide form, you know, from sugar and amino acids. It goes a step beyond the Maillard, and it's mainly in high temperature cooking. It's boiling and steaming doesn't form acrylamide. So there's a lot of technical things done on, you know, not necessarily potato, but on different compounds that can be present. You know, see, avoid acrylamide in fried foods. It's a cancer risk. So you can avoid by frying it at the right temperature for the right duration. You know, it's not all potatoes that form that. Even, it's not only in potato, but when you barbecue meats and even bread, the very, you know, blackened part on top can contain some acrylamide. And then there's also a breeding, plant breeding to produce here. And somebody is working with potato plants bred at USDA with low levels of acrylamide when it is fried. So these are the things that lead to research. And reducing sugars are the ones that are very susceptible to this browning. So in industrial processing, sometimes what they do is they wash all the sugars from the surface and spray an even layer, spray of glucose to give the even browning. You know? So that is another way of role of a food technology. So you have to know how to remove what is naturally present, and then to add a thin spray of, you know, to get the desired color. Then, you know, the storage in a cool, dark place. I'm sure you all know, you know, the greening of potatoes, which Solani. And in a potato factory, you can see a whole row of women cutting off these green parts. Nowadays, there are machines that can optically, you know, so you cut the French fry and send it through a machine, and they, you know, just toss the ones out which are green or with defects or with black color. So it's becoming mechanized. So the people are getting redundant in, you know, standing there and cutting these potato things. So in a factory, I'm now taking you to a factory you get this whole lot of potatoes. Remember the potato plantation, and you take it there and you wash it, convey processing line, and then put it into a steam thing to burst the skin, and through abrasion, remove the skins, and that skin itself becomes a major problem, a whole lot of volumes. So some pig farmers take these skins and feed to the pigs, So that's another thing which can be used as a filler for animal feed. And then it becomes like this, and then you cut through what is called water knives for McDonald's. This is a whole lot of McDonald's picture. And there are different sorts of cutters, and if it is not cut properly, if it kind of shatters when the potato goes through the machine, you get kind of like unevenness on the surface. That's called feathering. And when you fry, there's a larger surface area and it absorbs more fat. So best thing is to have a very sharp knives and to do this cutting in a clean way so that you get very even surface. So again, a role for a food technologist, how to reduce the fat level absorbed during frying by making sure that the technology of processing is correct. Different kinds of cuttings are there, including spiral. So because I'm taking you to the potato, example that I'm using. So after that, you get this, you steam it, blanch the potato, because otherwise it can also go brown. There's a browning process, not the enzymatic browning when you steam. There's also something called cryogenic acid, and iron, gives a kind of dullness to the French fry. Plus, there is, by heating and cooling process, you get the starch structure to undergo retrogradation, which also gives a certain amount of firmness. So even if you start with a not so high solids potato, by readjusting the structure of the starch molecule, you can get it to kind of withstand overcome the sogginess. Then also by doing that heating, you get the surface gelatinized, and that can act as a barrier for fat absorption. So can minimize the fat absorption that way. And then in the processing, you par fry, not the full fry, but seal the outside by par frying and freezing. And during par frying, you get the texture and the flavor firmed up. And then freeze it, blast freezing, because if you freeze slow freezing, the ice crystals are large, and a less number of ice crystals. When you fry, they will damage the thing, and again the fat will go in and also become soggy. By doing the blast freezing, blast means a very gush of cold air at -18 comes through this moving belt, and it freezes with small crystals, a large number of small ice crystals, which when thawed does not damage the fry or any frozen food. So, and then they do the frozen fries are packed into this kind of form, fill and seal packaging, and end up putting into boxes like this for commercial use, and they are packed into cartons, so that they don't get damaged, and have to store in cold storage, frozen storage. So it's like a farm to factory now in this condition. And then what we do, the McDonald's, or we take it home and we do the final frying. And the temperature and the time and the type of fat has to be right in order to get the minimum fat absorption as well as to develop the right flavor and color. And during the fat frying, you get the flavor developed and the quality changes, color, texture, nutritional changes, and some of the compounds that provide that flavor in fried foods. And then, fries on the fork. Now, how your body uses food is also very important for food technologies. From farm to fork, it doesn't just enter, but we have to make sure that what we eat is what we really require and what does good to our bodies. So good nutrition is good business, I'm sure you agree. And there are different ways that people make use of nutrition to market their products. They have fed the chickens with omega-3 rich food, and they're selling the eggs as heart healthy eggs, smart eggs. And then, the brassica families, they say, can prevent cancer, not so much cure cancer, but prevent. So these kind of things are possible products that a research institute can research, not necessarily these brassica, but I was told that things like kovaka and tebu or something like that, I'm now discovering these things are good for blood sugar, and karavila, and bandaka, they say, even putting bandaka in water and drinking this mucilaginous thing. So there are a lot of things that are local, which can be made into commercial products and marketed overseas, because people are now becoming very aware and they want natural things, and if we can prove those, substantiate our statements, how much of this will provide this benefit, there's an industry waiting to happen here. Our food industry has grown quite a lot over the last 40 years that I've been away, and because when I did food technology, there was no food technology in Ceylon, Sri Lanka. That's why we went out. I was looking for, because I got really interested when I did agriculture. There wasn't, so that's what took me overseas and still there. And then, of course, the cereal grain, although this is wheat, it applies to rice as well. The outer layers, as you polish the things, most of the vitamins and minerals go down like that. And then people add back nutrients, fortified, enriched wheat flour and all that. And even my own PhD thesis was in America. At that time, vitamin B6, American government was looking at adding vitamin B6 into their wheat flour, and I happened to be in the place to do this research, and it was stable and also bioavailable, so based on that, they started adding this. And then supplements, as I mentioned earlier, becoming quite a business worldwide. And so will our food end up being pills one day? I hope not. So we can still enjoy fried egg instead of swallowing a pill. And coming from New Zealand, I have to mention something about meat and milk, and I'm sure you must have been exposed to a lot of New Zealand milk problem, over the last months. So there are beautiful places in New Zealand. I spent some time in this particular place and really was really inspired by this mountain, And that is an area where, they call white gold, not only for snow, but for the milk as well. And there was some, the last samurai movie was filmed here, like a Japanese movie. They thought this is the closest to Mount Fuji, and it was done here. And in New Zealand, the milking is done in large scale like this. About 200 cows can be milked in 1 hour. In a carousel like this, it's a very interesting thing to see. Milk is like a huge industry there. And milk is not only transported in these trucks, but in trains too. Such a volume of milk, so they have to sell it to somewhere. And we have been receiving that milk, and not so much in the fresh form. And this food safety is very important from farm to fork. Then, I'm sure you must have seen this. So, I don't know, you probably have your own opinions. I think it's something that could have been avoided, But it would have done a lot of damage, but I think it's probably a blessing in disguise for our country here to be self-sufficient. And then this is a familiar scene now. When I was growing up here, we didn't have supermarkets. And we used to buy not even organized like this. And then from there to home and to the plate and to the fork. And this is the food we eat. As a hobby, I have been writing poems, like Kavi style poems. And I'd like to leave you with a poem that I wrote some years ago called The Food We Eat. The food we eat is a great cocktail we know of nutrients which exist as both high and so low. Depending on the needs, they will vary as we grow. We select these to suit us with less or with more. Proteins are needed for bodybuilding, they say. Babies depend on mom's milk as their way. As adults, we need proteins to repair and delay the loss of our muscles as healthy we stay. CHO stands for carbohydrate, both types, simple and complex, where each one complies. Where sugar, starch, or fiber with energy supplies for all our work as day-to-day comprise. The fats we know, there are the good and the bad. Depending on the acid that they form, can be clad into saturated, mono, or polyunsaturated fat. In any case, they give calories that make us not glad. Next group of nutrients is vitamins and more. A, D, E, K are fat soluble and so need fats to supply them with, while the other group is more soluble in water as B and C and D grow. B complex vitamins have names of their own: thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, so on. Pantothenic, pyridoxine, and collagen, we go on. The 12th one is cyanocobalamin on its own. Minerals are many and they vary a lot. Calcium protects teeth and bones from being rot. Iron, as we know, makes our blood red. If not, we end up as an anemic and a lethargic lot. Water is also very important for us, as there are many functions that only it does. Excrete our waste through kidneys, no fuss. Cleansing our system and hydrating it does. We need all these nutrients every day of our life: cereals, fruits and veggies, plus meat cut with knife, cooked into a meal by dear husband or wife, with variety, moderation and enjoyment of life. So I like to leave you with the idea, conclusion: variety, moderation and enjoyment. Thank you. When I shared that with my husband and wife, when I was in Singapore, somebody asked, what about the maid?
So any questions from the audience?
Comments, questions? I hope, it was useful. Ask any question.
Yeah, it's about food processing, frozen foods. So is there any difference in frozen foods or fresh? I mean, sometimes frozen foods were being frozen while it's fully ripe.
Yeah. Frozen, it can, frozen, just freezing foods have to go through pre-processing, like blanching before you freeze. So certain nutrients can be lost during that process, but if a fresh product is not properly handled, and if a frozen is done in a proper way, sometimes you might end up having better nutrients in the frozen than in the fresh. That's one thing. But if you can freshly harvest and eat, as I said, that's the best. But frozen is not processed right. Ripe means mature. The right degree of maturity is very important for making processed foods. Like the company that I worked for, in addition to potatoes, they also did a lot of peas, frozen peas, and so they don't go and grow all the peas on one day. They stagger their growing, depending on how much they can harvest and process on that day. Yeah. So this lot is planted today, and when it matures, that goes into the factory to get processed. The second day, another lot. So staggered growing and staggered harvesting. So because of that, the companies that do it scientifically have got manage their processing very well. So you can get frozen foods which are even better than, I would say frozen is better than canned food because it's subjected to very high temperatures. So some of the vitamins which are heat labile can get destroyed. So on the whole, frozen foods are a good product, but if it is frozen properly. Did I answer your question? I don't know.
Yes, so, but once I heard, even for the transportation, the farmers, maybe some manufacturers, they let it kind of raw because it is not getting that much bad when it is transported.
Is it frozen or fresh?
No, fresh foods. I'm
fresh.
talking about fresh
Oh,
foods.
yes. Like say, for example, very difficult to transport ripe products, isn't it? Because of the texture and all that, unless you have and also because fruits are biological material, fruits and vegetables, they continue to breathe, and then they go through what is called senescence, So because of that, it's going to ripe and become too old, to consume. So they have to harvest at a stage where it will start ripening during the storage. Yeah, and some things like bananas, they harvest very raw and then they do like, ethylene rapid ripening. Taste is not good. In New Zealand, they don't have bananas, so when I come here and Kolikuttu variety, I'm really enjoying. There they have only one variety, a long banana, which is imported from either Philippines or Ecuador, which is not that variety. Yeah.
Do you know anything about the nitrosamine, the connection between, the nitrosamine, does potato contain nitrosamine in the tubers?
Nitrosamine?
It's a carcinogen.
Yeah, I know it's a carcinogen. It's normally present in processed meats, the cured meats, they use this to keep as a preservative as well as to maintain the color.
But some people say that those nitrosamines are formed in the soil due to interaction of chemical fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizers.
It's quite possible. I am not very sure, but it's a possibility. I think I may have heard about that as well, nitrosamines, but I haven't really, gone into it. Somebody the other day even asked me, with the rice, there's cyanide in rice. There had been some scare, isn't it? I don't know whether you know. I talked to Prakash, and asked him, and he said there had been something because some of the, especially in our kind of stagnant water, or wetland rice, there's an accumulation of cyanide, and there had been some kind of scare. I'll check this nitrosamine. I think I may have heard, but I kind of haven't gone in depth into that. But nitrosamine is a carcinogen, and especially through processed meats, ham, bacon, sausage.